When Mahayana enlarged its pantheon by adopting principal and attendant deities, male as well as female, Buddhism clearly made a dangerously close call on Brahmanical Hinduism. The development of Mahayana gave the religion a congenial form, a sort of family likeness, creating confusion in the minds of its fickle-minded lay supporters. Such a clouding of identity obviously worked in favor of the reinvigorated Brahmanical Hinduism, which enjoyed a massive advantage due to its mass base. Ritual eclecticism made boundaries between Buddhism and Brahmanical Hinduism quite porous, if not altogether non-existent in some instances. For example, on the basis of a study of donative inscriptions, Leslie Orr has shown that ritual boundaries between Brahmanical Hinduism, Jainas and Buddhists were unclearly defined as they shared patterns of worship and understandings of the nature of the deity. Similarly, the ritual eclecticism seen in the Manjushri Moolkalp persisted in later tantric texts, with the result that at least the ritual boundaries between the Buddhists and Brahmanical Hindus do seem to have been eradicated in at least some cases. In the Tantra Sar Sangraha of Narayan, a text of the 15th-16th century, rituals as boundaries between Vaishnavism, Shaivism and Buddhism are completely done away with. Padmanabhan Jaini has pointed out that the force of Brahmanical Hindu sabotage and the insidious weaning away of lay support through the absorption of heterodox beliefs and cults into the Brahmanical Hindu sphere must not be underestimated. Development of doctrines such as that of the Bodhisattvas clearly turned out to be perilous and carried Buddhism speedily within the assimilative range of Brahmanical Hinduism. Though the Buddha remained nominally the most hallowed of beings, he lost ground to various bodhisattvas who came to be described as completely supramundane by nature. Actually, they became virtual gods whose powers to grant boons as well as their spiritual grace were not much different from those of the Brahmanical Hindu gods and goddesses. Consequently, Buddhism exposed itself not only to appropriation and subversive assimilation through identification with Brahmanical Hindu beliefs and practices, but it also opened its doors to the countless Shaivite deities, mantras, dharanis and mystical tantric practices surrounding the supramundane figures. In the end, the walls dividing Vishnu and the Buddha, Shiva and Avalokiteshwar, and Tara and Parvati were blown out of existence. Ironically, as remarked by Monier Williams, to quote him, Vaishnavas and Shaivas crept up softly to their rival and drew the vitality out of its body by close and friendly embraces, unquote. Tantra has been perceived by some scholars as being responsible for the ruination of Buddhism. For instance, Vivekananda believed that, to quote him, the most hideous ceremonies, the most horrible, the most obscene books that human hands ever wrote or the human brain ever conceived, the most bestial forms that ever passed under the name of religion have all been the creation of degraded Buddhism. Then gradually the corruption known as Vamchar, unrestrained mixing with women in the name of religion, crept in and ruined Buddhism. such diabolical rites are not to be met with in any modern tantra, unquote. Though there may be some truth in the allegation that tantra, both in Buddhism and Brahmanical Hinduism, was sometimes followed in a degenerate form, yet as pointed out by Alex Wayman, the so-called degeneration and corruption does not seem to have caused the decline as such. In Brahmanical Hinduism, Tantra has enjoyed great popularity and apparently has not contributed to its demise in any observable amount. However, as Tantrism drew Buddhism and Brahmanical Hinduism closer to each other, this kind of delusion of distinctiveness may have been at the very bottom of the decline of Buddhism in India. From the 8th century onwards, Tantric ideas slowly but effectively influenced Buddhism to the extent that it became completely metamorphosed and unrecognizable. As Anand Bhattacharya points out, to quote him, while the philosophical teachings of the Buddha received a new interpretation at the hands of the masterminds like Asanga, Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu and Aryadev, and the great logicians like Chandrakirti, Shantidev, Dignag and Dharmakirti were guarding the front doors of Buddhist monasteries, Tantricism steadily made its way into Buddhism through the back doors, unquote. As time went by, the Hindu and the Buddhist tantras began to openly behave as kissing cousins, and the resemblances between Buddhism and Brahmanical Hinduism, which had begun to multiply under the influence of Mahayana, became alarmingly profuse under the influence of the Tantra customs. This made the existence of Buddhism as a distinct entity unfeasible. The borrowing went on till the last hour, when even the characteristic and distinctive symbols of the Buddhists got intricately woven up into a common cobweb with those of the Brahmanical Hindus. In fact, Buddhist deities such as Kali, Bhadrakali and Manju Ghosh were absorbed into the Brahmanical Hindu pantheon so thoroughly that the ideological incongruities were completely obliterated in the minds of an average worshipper. As pointed out by Anand Bhattacharya, to quote him, Tantric ideals associated with the cult of Shakti changed Buddhism to such a great extent that it ceased to be Buddhism at all, unquote. But there were no great surprises, violent revolutions or holy wars that took place in this almost invisible, painstakingly slow process of acculturation and assimilation that extended over more than 1,000 years. The excellent quality of Buddhism at adaptation had led to its success and spread in foreign lands. The same quality vis-a-vis Brahmanical Hinduism appears to have become problematic in India. The Buddha had preached the wastefulness of worshipping, making sacrifices and indulging in magical practices to please God or various deities, but the Buddhist Sangha succumbed to those very beliefs and practices and assumed the form of being an elaborate worship of all sorts of gods and goddesses of the popular pantheon. Thus, for instance, grand centers such as the Vikramshila Vihar had even the provision for a Bali Acharya and a Home Acharya. Thus, as pointed out by D.P. Chattopadhyay, with the assumption of such a queer form, Buddhism was left with no internal justification to survive as a distinct creed. Thank you so much.